So it looks like more managers are getting paranoid that their employees are not being productive. And so what do? They spy on them. All right, so let's jump into this article. The article title says Microsoft executives say it's wrong for managers to spy on the remote employees' mouse clicks and keystrokes. That's measuring heat rather than outcome. And you've got a picture of the Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella speaking at one of the conferences. Before even jumping into the article, I'm going to agree with their statement that I do think it's wrong for managers to spy on their employees. I think there's a lot better signals and proxies that you can use to measure employee productivity. And so hopefully this article will capture some of those, but let's jump right in. The bullet point says Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said managers are plagued by productivity paranoia amid remote work. The other vice president, Jared Spatero, said worker surveillance measures heat rather than outcome. And the New York Times previously reported that some companies are measuring keystrokes and mouse clicks to spy on staff. Oh my gosh. So basically it looks like some of these companies are measuring APM. For those of you guys that don't know, APM is a acronym in StarCraft, actions per minute. And so it looks like some of these companies are starting to measure that, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, let's keep going in. So what prompted the Microsoft team to even say this? It says that remote work has spurred productivity paranoia amongst managers, leading to efforts to spy on people. Leaders think their employees are not productive, whereas employees think that they are being productive and in many cases even feel burnt out, he said in an interview with Bloomberg TV. The publication reported that Microsoft held a corporate survey that polled 20,000 people across 11 countries on productivity during the era of remote and hybrid work. The survey found that 85% of managers are concerned that workers aren't being productive, and 87% of employees see that they are working effectively, a disconnect between workers and managers that Microsoft aims to fix. All right, so it sounds like Microsoft did their own sort of internal survey, and the outcome from that survey found that more managers are concerned about their employees and their team's productivity. And on the other hand, employees are saying they do feel productive and that they are working effectively. So there's a disconnect here. And, the answer is who's telling the truth? I mean, truth, I guess, is relative in this sense because this is sort of their opinion and their feeling. And there's obviously going to be some bias built in depending on whether you're a manager or an individual contributor. But yeah, let's keep going in. It said that Nadella said better communication tools can help bridge the gap, but Jared Spatero said he worries executives are turning more towards worker surveillance instead. Wow, it sounds like government, big brother stepping into public and private corporations instead of, trusting their employees that they're being productive. There's a quote from him. It says, "There's a growing debate about employee surveillance, and we have a really strong stance here at Microsoft. We just think that's wrong." Bravo, Microsoft. Bravo for taking a stand. We don't think that employers should be surveying and taking note of the activity of keystrokes and mouse clicks and those types of things because in so many ways, we feel like that's measuring heat rather than outcome. For me personally, just to give you guys a little bit of a little anecdote, I've been a manager before. And, this was before the pandemic. And so I was actually physically in the office, regularly talking to my team, having coffee chats and things of that nature. And I do remember, there are times when as a manager, you want to keep your team accountable. You want to make sure that they're staying on top of things. But, micromanaging is counterproductive. That actually creates more distrust. It makes your employees less motivated and less inspired to do their best work. And so when you're constantly looking over their shoulders and trying to see if they're being productive, it just doesn't work. And I do remember, I went through this myself where I did go through a phase where I was kind of being a little bit more on my employees and micromanaging them. And I got the feedback very early on from my team and also from my own boss that I needed to kind of reflect back and make sure that I wasn't doing that. And once I identified those changes and changed my approach, we got so much more done. We are so much more productive. We got so much more trust in between our teams. And that really went a long way. And so it's really important that a company such as Microsoft, who are one of the, the titans in the tech industry, and, they're setting the standard for other companies to say, hey, this is wrong. We need to make sure that we're not creating that distrust between our teams. Because if they start surveying companies or if other companies start to survey their employees and those employees find out, they're not only going to be more distrustful, it's also going to be more expensive for these companies to track and operationalize this because now there's going to be teams dedicated to measuring the mouse clicks and all these other keystrokes and things like that to measure productivity. Also, the statement here that they're going to start looking at activity of keystrokes and mouse clicks. I mean, I think it's going to be very difficult, even if you were to do that, to determine whether or not that's actually leading to productivity or not. Someone could be at their desk and just spamming on their keyboard on a blank template and not actually doing anything physical work. And so I think there's a lot of flaws with this mechanism that I'm sure the article will talk about a little bit more. Anyways, that's kind of my personal take on my experience being a manager and having gone through this myself. And then also on the flip side, at the end of the day, we all work for somebody. There's multiple layers, especially when you work for a Fortune 500 company where almost everyone works for someone, even the CEO. They're reporting to the board of directors. And so there's always going to be a manager above us. And, I think it's important to set it at the very top, at the CEO level, in the case with Microsoft at, Satya's level, to set the standard for everyone below him to say, hey, there's other ways that you can measure employee productivity. And surveying them and looking at what they're doing on a daily basis is just not the way to go. Continuing on with the article, it says that the New York Times reported that companies are increasingly turning to worker surveillance measures amid the office landscape, which has become focused on remote and hybrid work environments. The publication detailed multiple methods companies had employed to measure workers' productivity, from tracking mouse clicks and keystrokes to having staff take random photos to ensure the workers were at their computers. Okay, well, that's not going to alleviate the distrust that people have with their webcams being pointed in front of them every time they're sitting at their desk. Not at all. Yeah, that's a little creepy, guys, to be honest with you. Even as Nadella said managers should resist productivity fears, Microsoft has not given up on its efforts to bring workers back into the office. They're providing a policy that employees should be in the office at least 50% of the time and giving more incentives to them. But it also says workers have been turning down raises in favor of working from home. So it sounds like most people appreciate the benefit of working from home and not having to commute, which, I think is valid. And companies need to be flexible to offer those kinds of flexible work environments. Otherwise, these employees, especially if they're in very critical roles, they're probably going to go leave elsewhere if these companies aren't giving those benefits. I think that's the end of the article. I think I've kind of said my piece. I think employee productivity is important. Right. And for companies that allow remote and hybrid work environments, honestly, I think it's a privilege. I don't think it's something that every company has to do. Companies have the right to ask their employees to come back in. And, I think it's important that depending on the job, depending on the company and the industry that they're in, that they create the best environment for their employees. And, if you're a Tesla factory worker, obviously it's going to be difficult to do your job at home if you're on the assembly line and building the actual cars itself. So I think it's a case by case basis where companies need to make that decision whether to offer those benefits and those privileges or not. The other thing that I think is important here is that measuring keystrokes and looking at the number of clicks that employees have, that's such a surface level way of measuring things. And I'm sure there's more to here, but looking at the actual amount of time that an employee is sitting at their desk doesn't necessarily mean that they're being productive. I remember last year during the pandemic, I actually went to go work in Hawaii, and because my company operated on the Pacific time zone, I would wake up earlier so that I could get all my work done. And my day would end around 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. because I think we were 2 hours behind the West Coast. And so that would give me the benefit of going out to the beach, going on hikes, and just exploring Hawaii while also meeting my obligations, attending all my meetings, and getting all my stuff done. And so there are, I think, other signals that companies can look at to make sure whether employees are getting their stuff done. For example, if you're looking at Slack or other messaging platforms, as a manager, if you're asking your team questions, if you're asking for updates, are people actually responding to them, or is it taking them, half a day or more to respond, right? That can be sort of one signal to see whether your employees are productive or not. A lot of companies also have certain deliverables, whether it's, slide decks or documents or actually being able to ship products. As someone who works on the product team, there's a lot of artifacts that I'm responsible for. And if I'm not delivering on those artifacts, whether it's, PR FAQs, if they're requirement docs, if they're, external launch announcements to customers saying that, hey, we've launched X, Y, and Z, then it's going to be pretty obvious to my manager and also to the broader team that Paul isn't doing his work. And that's an obvious sign that they need to bring down the hammer on me or have a conversation to say, hey, what's going on? Those, I think, are some of the things that companies need to measure and look at rather than the actual time that you're spending in front of the screen. I think there are people out there that can work more efficiently in a smaller amount of time, and they can get probably just as much done as someone else who's spending 8 hours, 12 hours in front of their desk. And so I think there are definitely case by case scenarios, depending on the job function, that companies need to look at rather than just having a blanket approach and just looking at the number of clicks that you have on your keyboard. Anyways, guys, I've spent a lot of time on this. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with this article, and do you agree with Microsoft's position, or do you think companies should be, monitoring their employees and actually looking at their individual keystrokes and mouse clicks to see if they're being productive? Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are. Like this video, share it, and subscribe if you haven't, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.